On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Pritesh Patel. He is Director of AI at Fisher Phillips, and we're going to be talking about AI's impact on knowledge-based businesses. We're going to, cover what's happening now and talk about that model, which is really, an incremental revenue per person type model. AI obviously is making big changes. We're going to talk about moving early on the technology and driving the adoption within the company, areas of opportunities, and we're also going to touch on, how is the model going to potentially change and become more outcome driven. Pritesh, thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, can you tell everybody what Fisher Phillips does?
Yeah, Fisher Phillips is an employment law firm. It's on the defense side of employment. So essentially, we're helping employers navigate the whole employee landscape of laws and what they need to do to actually keep themselves compliant and make sure they're treating their employees correctly and right. And then whenever there's some sort of issue, Fisher Phillips actually defends them.
Awesome. All right. This episode of the show will be about, talking about the AI's impact on knowledge-based businesses. And maybe a good place to start in case somebody isn't familiar with how the industry works. It's always good to set some context. Tell us, about being a knowledge-based business and what that actually means.
Yeah. So, in terms of my background, I never thought I'd join a law firm. I'm a computer scientist, AI research background. I've been in a lot of non-tech first industries, and Fisher Phillips is also one of them, or law firms are actually one of them. But with AI, there's a lot of change going on. And if you expand out from law firms in the legal landscape, which is a knowledge-based industry, the general knowledge-based industry is becoming disrupted with AI, right? And there's a lot of opportunities there. So if you think about economics at a high level, this is the way I think about it, right? The idea of knowledge arbitrage, somebody knows something more than another person, and that person who doesn't know relies on the person who knows that specific expertise to help them on certain things. And that's essentially knowledge arbitrage, and that's where value is created and you get services in that. That's the knowledge-based industry of how I define it. There might be lots of other definitions for different people. But what's happening with AI is it's essentially making that industry a lot more efficient. Access to knowledge is becoming a lot easier with AI models. So there's a deep opportunity for people in this industry or firms in this industry to take advantage of that, to essentially speed up advancement at the end of the day, right? And so that's how I define knowledge-based industries, essentially defining that knowledge arbitrage gap. Essentially.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I think when we talk about, the way most industries work, right? Whether it's software, it's pay by seat, whether it's consulting, it's some kind of revenue per person, a bill rate, there's a project you're allocated to. I mean, I think this is the way it's been done for the last 100 years. I don't know, maybe I'm incorrect, but at least for the last 60, 70 years, that's how projects work. When you look at that model, obviously people are paying for that expertise. They're paying for someone who has knowledge, even services to an extent. I mean, you have an electrician come to your house because you don't want to get electrocuted. I mean, it all works that way. We pay for expertise. With AI coming in and I guess making access to that knowledge more it's wider, it's cheaper, it's faster, all those things. You said, obviously, it's putting pressure on knowledge-based businesses. You joined a law firm, so obviously that's an interesting shift. I'm glad you clarified that. There is an opportunity here, but it also seems that it disrupts the old model, which is it's got to be an interesting position to be in. But are we seeing that intersection of, yes, there's opportunity, but also the old way of doing things might be at risk?
Yeah, there is a balance of that. First of all, I don't think it's going to be like a cut and dry, like today it's this way, the next day is that way. There's going to be a transition. But I think the old ways of working, what's going to be important is the intents of that. What were the outcomes of those ways of working? What was the purpose of that? That's what's important. Those things are going to stay. It's just the way you're doing it now, how fast you get to those outcomes. And some of those things may actually end up being automated so you can focus on the more complex and creative aspects of the work is going to change. Or it is already changing at the end of the day. So there is a balance of that. I am one of those believers that when anytime something new like this comes around, you need to take control and not control of, start using it, become familiar with it, and see how it can help you on a daily basis as an individual person or as a business. Because in any industry, these things are going to continue. You're going to continue to innovate. You're going to continue to advance, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to adapt because you're late in the game and it's due to competition. If you're at least in the beginning of all of this and learning how it is, you can actually make the future happen the way you see it's supposed to happen within your industry. So you want to be the driver. So that's what I'm a big proponent of. And I think that opportunity exists here in the next couple of years for a lot of industry, of a lot of firms in the legal space or in the knowledge-based industry.
How, and again, I think, context, when it comes to the legal industry, where are, and again, obviously this is just your opinion, but where is an average law firm in the scope of technology maturity? And the reason I'm asking is that is obviously one hurdle, and the other actually the adoption of AI and using it. We'll talk about that, but just in general, when it comes to technology, where does an average law firm sit in technology maturity?
That's a good question. I'm still fairly new to the legal industry, but what I do know just from the initial research that I've done is we're right now right in the middle of people adjusting, trying to figure out what we can do with this. It's a little behind overall. I don't think a lot of law firms hire folks like myself at the end of the day, right? The concept of an engineer sitting with someone who's an expert in that particular industry, there's a term for it that other companies have come up with, like 4 deployed engineers. That even in regular other industries, that doesn't happen that often. But I think that's where the opportunity really is, where the knowledge expert and the engineer and scientists are sitting next to each other. They're sharing knowledge and they're actually building what the future should be for that particular firm.
Interesting. And that was actually going to be my next question. And you kind of helped us segue in terms of, a law firm hiring somebody and again, your background, obviously I don't do bios on the show, for the most part. So, we're talking about your background and just to highlight it, just for context, you've worked at, some big companies. You've worked at, Walmart as a director of product AI automation. You've worked at Better, GE. You've worked at, tech companies, for the most part, companies that are working with advanced tech. You have a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science. You are at what would be in demand at any other big tech, small tech, doesn't matter, right? You've chosen to go into an industry where, again, you said the opportunity is ripe. They don't hire a lot of people like you. When it comes to communicating to your stakeholders, right? So have you noticed in the couple of months you've been at this, have you noticed that you've had to make some adjustments? Because obviously your stakeholders are, they're a lot of lawyers, I'm assuming, but I'll let you tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing you have to do in this industry or any industry that you start, and since I've been at a lot of non-tech or tech first companies, there's usually a certain business that's the main function of revenue. It's not tech. Tech is usually a supporting function. So I've had to learn, by fire, how you have to empathize with the operators of this business. What's really important to them? What are the outcomes that they're really desiring? Because at the end of the day, the technology is just a tool or to help them get that outcome, right? When people go to Home Depot and they're looking for a drill, they're not really looking or in the market to buy a drill. What they're looking for is a hole in the wall at the end of the day, right? So you need to focus in that industry on what are the holes in the walls, what are those outcomes that they're wanting. And that takes a lot of time where you have to sit there and listen and learn about the processes. I've done that in other industries. One of the reasons why I joined Fisher Phillips is When you don't have that partnership, it's hard to get that, really learn that and actually help them with whatever outcomes they're doing. Fisher Phillips is very much into investing in this. It's a very collaborative firm. So in that sense, the reason why I joined is just fun. It's just when you have the ability to learn a new industry that you are not a part of, but your skill sets are useful in that, that's a very fun thing to be in. So I think that is also the opportunity here, where different people with different sets of knowledge are actually sharing their knowledge. And it's just in history, like there's actually, I can have that book here. There's this book called the Atlas of Economic Complexity. Economic complexity, yes. And essentially what they do is they studied countries where there's different sets of knowledge bases of people that are interacting. And the countries that had the most diverse sets of knowledge that are actually interacting were actually the most innovative. They had the greatest ideas. They had the greatest outcomes. So essentially, if you bring that from a macro level to a micro level within a company, that's really fun. And that's why we're here. And that's the opportunity that I see with knowledge-based industries, essentially.
I like that. That's really interesting, and appreciate the reference to the book as well. We'll link to it. I guess when it comes to your mandate, right? You sounds like you're looking to bring some innovation. You're a big fan of driving some of that change right before the competition gets up, because it becomes a competitive advantage. When you take a job like this, and I think it's interesting for people to hear, because some people might not think, hey, I'll join a law firm. Do you outline up front in this type of role where a company doesn't hire often for it in terms of what the expectations are, what your goals are in terms of what you're trying to achieve? Because the tricky thing is some company going, we want to take advantage of this. We're going to hire somebody really good at this, and then we're going to see what they do. That normally, for sure, is a ripe recipe for disaster. Assuming a law firm is much more methodical than that. Like, what does that look like when you're going through the interview process and you're trying to outline objectives and goals? What does that look like in something like this?
Yeah. So, and this is just my philosophy. The technical skill sets are obviously an important aspect of it, which is, you can test those. You can also learn those, right? At the end of the day, if you're willing to learn, depending on their personality, but the personality is what really matters. If you are an individual who's very curious and wanting to learn about new industries, new processes, if you're really good at listening, and really getting deep down and understanding what is the fundamental hidden truth here of what everybody's talking about. If you're good at that, that's a skill set that's hard to learn. And usually those things come from just life experiences. It's not something that's taught in school necessarily, right? It's just different things you've been through in life. It makes you good at doing that from a professional and personal perspective, right? So that's what I look for. If you have that skill set, you're going to be much better at understanding what's really needed within a particular, environment, right? And that's what we're really trying to do at the end of the day. There's so many things that we have to do, but we have to really figure out what is the most impactful thing that we can do. And then go and actually designing and there's a whole process in actually being a good designer, modularizing what you're building and actually building something that's actually, usable in production. So that stuff can be learned, but the other sides are a little bit harder to learn. It takes a longer time to learn. So that's what I look for at the end of the day.
I like that. And I guess when you're looking at, exploring opportunities within the company, what does that look like for you? Obviously, I'm sure you have a backlog of areas that you want to focus on. How do you look at those opportunities? How do you evaluate one versus the other? Is it a low-hanging fruit or, most valuable to the company? How do you look at that?
Well, one of the ways that I've always done this is any industry that I go into, you really need to understand what are the fundamental functions that run that particular company or whatever industry you're in. At the end of the day, you got to look at the functions that no matter how much technology and advancements happen, those things have to happen for that industry to function. What are those functions? What are those groups? So I map all that out at the end of the day. essentially the process of listening, right? That's what product managers do. And you do that well enough, you're going to have this roadmap of areas where these are the outputs that we have to create. The process is independent of that. The current process that produces that is now you start looking at that process to see how well are we producing those outcomes, given that we have to produce those. And from that, you'll have measures. Is it cost? Is it revenue? Is it time saved? You got to measure those things. Once you're disciplined about that, you'll start to understand you can easily rank where the biggest impact opportunities are. And that's how we go about doing it. Notice in this, we didn't ever talk about technology. We didn't ever talk about what type of AI solution or what LLM we need to use. That's the fundamental first step. Once you figure that out, then you can start deciding, okay, how are we going to actually produce this outcome?
Absolutely. I think actually, I agree with you. In the context of AI, I think we really do need to focus on the business solution first. Now, having said that, there does come, I know a lot of people in the last year or two have been going through and setting up, areas to experiment, test, work with these AIs. I know you come in with that background, but also some of those POCs to help the company start seeing the opportunities, because it's different when you see, touch, feel it within your own company. Is that something that's that you're experiencing right now to kind of bring more of that technology in and give the company a chance to build some of that muscle memory?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. We've created a roadmap of things that we think are priorities for us. And the first thing, that's when you can put on your entrepreneurial hat and start prototyping things. And so you start to show folks like this is the way this can potentially work, which essentially generates new ideas and new thoughts. And we continue to enhance and improve upon that. And eventually you keep going through that iteration cycle. And the faster you do that, the better. You're going to have something you can put into production, and you're actually working with the experts at this, right? That's the whole loop. You build something, you give it to the experts that are actually going to use it. They give you feedback. You go back and test it, figure it out. What are the new problems and put those features in, and you keep iterating. And it's no secret. That's the process of innovation. And the challenge is to create that engine where you're iterating fast within an environment that you're already in. One of the reasons why it's fun here, because we can do that pretty fast. We are a pretty nimble firm. Some of the large companies I've been at, it's not as fast to do, but I think that can be a competitive advantage for a company where you have that iteration cycle running really fast. You can build some really innovative things pretty quickly. Absolutely.
I guess when you're looking at, and we talked about it, and I've heard from CTOs, CDOs that I'm talking to, we hear even with large consulting firms, we hear about companies are realizing these advantages in AI from that, knowledge-based solution, and companies are going, okay, well, you're getting more efficient. And we touched on this before. You're getting more efficient means it's getting cheaper, probably. Yeah. And to touch back on the model, and I know we're just hypothesizing, but obviously a lot has been discussed around outcome-driven revenue models we've been talking about for a long time. We haven't really seen it, but what are your thoughts of, and again, not overnight, it's going to be a transition, but what are your thoughts in terms of seeing a move to that outcome-driven revenue model?
I think that's actually around the horizon, which I think overall, and this is just my opinion, that's a better thing to offer, where you're getting paid because you actually produce the outcome. And the opportunity to do that in a sustainable way where you still have a business and you're making profit and it's a sustainable business and your customers are happier, that future, I think, is much more attainable now with AI. Obviously, there's going to be a transition towards that, but I think that is much more attainable. And I'm a proponent of that. So all the work we're doing internally when we're talking about what are the actual outcomes we're trying to produce is actually just the precursors to actually producing that at the end of the day, right? So I do believe that's going to be a better thing to offer.
Do you think as we're seeing AI, and when it comes to knowledge, right? I think there's one thing that I've realized, and I don't know what's going to happen with AI, but I have gone to YouTube and I've tried to see how to fix something in the house, because it's like, hey, can I do that? You spend a few minutes, you spend a half an hour, you're like, this is not going to be less than a day or two. I'm going to hire someone. I think there's this, I guess, view of AI that it does provide knowledge, but I also, as humans, we don't quite know what to do sometimes with that knowledge, right? I think there's an expertise required to take knowledge and actually be able to execute with it. When it comes to these knowledge-based businesses, obviously outcome driven, this gap between having knowledge and knowledge becoming more democratized, people having more access to it, what are your views on how people will see that knowledge? And the reason I'm asking is the YouTube example is something a lot of people who are listening probably have tried. Even now, you go on WebMD, the knowledge is there for me to look up my symptoms and go, what's wrong with me? And I have 15 and I become the, WebMD doc, and I'm not quite sure what I have until I go to the doctor to really narrow it down. And the confidence to believe that I actually have found the right answer. I guess a couple of questions in there for you.
Yeah. People are using that for that purpose more and more, but you still need the experts to validate various things. I think at the lower level, you can find these answers. But for example, if you're trying to diagnose health, you obviously still want to talk to a doctor to validate certain things. So I think certain industries that are expertise industries that, like in the legal field, right? You got to know the latest legislation. Things change all the time. The complexity of how do you approach arguing a particular matter in a case. Those things aren't just going to come from these models. You still need an expert to help you guide through that. Same thing for the healthcare industry. So I think in those cases, it probably just makes people a little bit smarter about the things at the lower level, but it may guide you. We still need to be responsible how we're building this. And I don't think we have that responsibility structure just yet. But we're going to have to, it's not going to happen in a vacuum. We're going to have to be responsible what type of knowledge we're putting out there. Is it actually truthful? How do you validate that this is actually something that you can actually use? That part, the industries or the foundational model researchers are putting that into it. But I do feel like government is going to have a role to play in this at some point in time. I think one of the ways I thought about this, is, if you think about, as we're going to college and you get into school, like we take SAT tests, ACT tests, all these tests that test our aptitude on a particular subject so that we can get into school, right? They have the same thing with the models. They're essentially called evals. They're essentially SAT tests for these models. So I see a future at some point in time where government agencies may have certain tests for certain types of knowledge bases that you have to pass this for us to certify that this is a valid model you can use for this particular type of knowledge. And they will create those tests, right? And that builds a little bit more trust. So I do feel like there will be some sort of coordination that will happen. We're just not there at that point, at the moment right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take. And honestly, just to follow up with that, I do feel the legal industry is so nuanced. It's so complicated. Yes, there's very maybe some templates that are similar across, right? But potentially, I'd imagine no two cases are ever identical. Like that would be remotely crazy. I mean, even if they're very similar, they're still going to be different. In those cases, and you're looking at these solutions, is maybe the future that human in the loop? Is there efficiencies to be gained from, some of those common areas that you're like, those are really things that people don't need to pay us for because, those are just kind of boilerplate, and it lets the attorneys focus on some of the more nuanced things. Is that a fair assessment of where AI might sit, that human in the loop interaction?
Absolutely. This whole area or era that we're talking about where there's agents that people are building, they are going to be agents who are human in the loop. Those are some of the design patterns, some for the more complex things. And if you just take a step back, and you have to have that. If you think about how AI models are trained, they're trained on knowledge that we humans have put out there in the digital world somewhere, right? And there's a certain amount of complexity of problems that we've documented, but that's not the full potential of complexity of things that we can think through at the end of the day, right? So we're always going to be ahead of the complexity of what these models can actually work on. It's just that I think, there's this knowledge arbitrage gap, right? Between someone who's not an expert and an expert. It's that AI is speeding up where the non-experts can learn some of the lower level things faster. But for the experts, what I think is actually going to happen, it's not closing the gap. It's that they're not having to spend time on the mundane things to provide this service for your customers or whoever you're working with. It's going to free up time for them to think more on the more complex things. So I feel like the gap is actually going to increase. This is going faster where people are learning, but the other side where you're the expert, if you're still curious and you're still trying to learn your industry and what's the next greatest things, I think you're going to have more time to focus on that, where now it's the potential of human creativity and thought. How fast can that advance you? If you're doing more of that, even a 10% more, 15% more during your week, how much more you're going to actually learn and actually progress that industry. So I think that's what's going to happen at the end of the day.
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah. Great discussion. Pritesh, I'm sure we didn't cover everything and all the changes coming within AI in the legal industry, but I think we did a good job. You're fantastic. What's a good way if somebody wants to ask you just a follow-up question? What's a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I would love to chat with anybody who's interested in these things. Just hit me up on LinkedIn and I'm happy to chat and connect.
All right. We'll make sure to have everyone look for that. And again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Amir. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Pritesh did a great job of walking us through, AI within knowledge-based businesses. Obviously, he's working for a law firm, and he kind of spoke from that perspective. And we touched on, how the model might be shifting, areas of opportunity, talking and dealing with stakeholders and some of those expectations. Please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it. Also, subscribe, comment, let me know how this show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.